The European Union just broke 8 days of calculated silence, not with a routine statement, not with a carefully worded diplomatic note, not with the usual Brussels compromise language designed to offend nobody and commit to nothing. A 61-page document delivered simultaneously to 27 member state capitals at precisely 3 p.m. Central European Time that represents the most significant assertion of European strategic autonomy since the founding of the European Economic Community in 1957. Within 17 minutes, the U.S. State Department issued an emergency response. Within 45 minutes, NATO headquarters convened an unscheduled session. Within 3 hours, the White House press secretary faced reporters without prepared talking points. Warren Buffett called it the most expensive silence in transatlantic history. When you hear what those 8 days of silence concealed, why the European response fundamentally redefines 75 years of Atlantic Alliance assumptions, and what Warren Buffett says this means for American strategic dominance, you will understand why this is not another European complaint about burden sharing, but a declaration of independence that changes the architecture of global power. The silence began at 11:37 a.m. Washington time on a Tuesday, when the American administration announced a unilateral policy decision affecting European security interests without prior consultation with European allies. The decision involved the deployment of intermediate-range missile systems to Allied territories, a move that technically required consultation under existing NATO frameworks, but which Washington implemented through direct bilateral agreements with individual member states, deliberately bypassing Brussels. Standard protocol dictated immediate European response. The EU has a 24/7 crisis communication system designed for exactly these scenarios. The European External Action Service maintains procedures for coordinating member state positions within 6 to 12 hours of any major development affecting collective interests. Previous instances of American unilateral action had generated European statements within 8 to 14 hours. This time, nothing. Hour 12 passed with no European comment. Reporters in Brussels began asking EU spokespersons when a statement would be issued. The response was identical each time. The European Union is formulating its position and will communicate at the appropriate time. The phrasing was notable for its lack of commitment to any time frame. Hour 24 brought the first signs that something unusual was happening. European Commission President Annette Schaefer canceled a scheduled speech at the Munich Security Conference, an event where she had been expected to address transatlantic relations. The cancellation came with only 4 hours' notice, highly irregular for such a prominent engagement. No explanation was provided beyond scheduling conflicts. By hour 36, American officials were publicly expressing puzzlement. A State Department briefing included an unusually direct question: has the EU gone silent as some kind of protest? The spokesman responded that Washington remained in regular contact with European counterparts through normal channels. But privately, according to people familiar with the conversations, those normal channels were producing nothing beyond pleasantries and procedural updates. Hour 48 revealed coordination behind the silence. France's foreign minister postponed a planned meeting with the U.S. Secretary of State, citing unexpected domestic obligations. Germany's chancellor declined to take a scheduled call from the White House, with his office explaining he was in a cabinet meeting that ran longer than expected. Italy's prime minister was suddenly unavailable for comment. Poland's president had gone to a secure location for unspecified reasons. The simultaneous unavailability suggested orchestration rather than coincidence. European leaders are rarely all unreachable at the same time, except during scheduled summit meetings. This was not a summit. This was coordinated evasion. Hour 72 brought the first media speculation that the silence was deliberate. European newspapers that typically compete fiercely for scoops published nearly identical analysis, suggesting that Brussels was engaged in strategic reflection about the transatlantic relationship. The similarity of language across publications from different countries implied coordination, likely through selective briefings from EU officials. American media remained largely focused on domestic issues, giving the European silence minimal coverage. This asymmetry itself was revealing. In European capitals, the silence dominated front pages and led evening news broadcasts. In Washington, it warranted brief mentions buried in broader foreign policy roundups. The attention differential demonstrated whose relationship with whom mattered more. By hour 96, financial markets began noticing. Currency traders observed that the euro had strengthened 0.7% against the dollar over 4 days, despite no obvious economic catalyst. The movement was small enough to avoid triggering major attention, but persistent enough to suggest underlying capital flows. Someone was betting on European strength or American weakness. Defense industry stocks showed interesting patterns. European aerospace and defense companies saw unusual buying activity. American defense contractors with major European contracts experienced modest selling pressure. The spread between the two suggested investors were pricing in some probability of reduced European dependence on American defense systems. Hour 1:20 marked day 5 of silence. At this point, the absence of a statement was itself becoming a major diplomatic incident. NATO Secretary General, attempting to downplay concerns, held an impromptu press conference asserting that allies remain in constant communication through established channels. When asked specifically about the EU's silence, he acknowledged different institutional processes without providing any substantive explanation. The NATO statement inadvertently highlighted the core issue. The EU and NATO are distinct organizations with overlapping but not identical memberships. 21 EU members are also NATO members, but 6 EU countries are not NATO members, and several NATO countries are not in the EU. By framing his response around NATO, the Secretary General implicitly acknowledged that the EU as an institution was indeed maintaining silence. Hour 1:44 brought day 6 in escalating American frustration. An unnamed senior State Department official told reporters that Washington was seeking clarity on European intentions. The phrasing was diplomatic code for "we don't know what's happening and it's making us nervous." The official added that the unilateral policy decision had been made in good faith based on security assessments and that allies should trust American judgment on such matters. That statement may have been a tactical error. European sensitivity to American unilateralism ran deep after years of decisions made in Washington without meaningful consultation. Suggesting that Europe should simply trust American judgment rather than insisting on actual consultation confirmed European fears that Washington viewed the alliance as directed rather than consultative. Hour 168 marked the completion of 1 full week of silence. 7 days is long enough for silence to transition from temporary non-response to deliberate policy. European officials had now maintained coordination for 168 consecutive hours without a single significant leak or premature statement. The discipline itself sent a message about European seriousness and capability. Behind closed doors, those 7 days had been intensely active. The 27 EU member states have diverse interests, different threat perceptions, varying levels of dependence on American security guarantees, and complicated domestic political constraints. Achieving consensus on controversial issues typically requires weeks or months of negotiation, often resulting in watered-down compromises that satisfy nobody fully but offend nobody enough to block agreement. This time, according to officials who participated in the discussions, the process was different. The American decision had been so flagrantly unilateral, and the bypass of EU institutions so deliberate that even traditionally, Atlanticist member states felt compelled to support a strong response. The unilateralism unified Europe in a way that direct threats often failed to achieve. The negotiations focused less on whether to respond strongly than on how to structure that response to maximize impact while minimizing risks. Hawks wanted explicit threats of retaliation. Dove's preferred emphasis on European disappointment and calls for renewed consultation. The compromise that emerged split the difference in a sophisticated way that would become clear only when the actual statement appeared. Day 8 began with unusual activity in Brussels. Journalists noticed increased security around the European Council building. Staff members who typically shared information freely with reporters became conspicuously unavailable. At 2 p.m., an alert went to accredited press. A major statement would be issued at 3 p.m., with simultaneous delivery to all member state capitals and transmission to the United States government. The timing itself carried meaning. 3 p.m. Brussels time was 9 a.m. in Washington. European officials ensured their statement would hit during the heart of the Washington workday, guaranteeing immediate American response, while European officials would be approaching evening and could delay follow-up questions until the next day. The time zone differential provided tactical advantage. At exactly 3 p.m., the document appeared on official EU platforms. The title alone signaled the seriousness: on the necessity of European strategic autonomy, a framework for independent decision-making in defense and security matters. Not a press release, not a statement of concern. A framework document outlining a comprehensive policy architecture. The document began with a historical recitation, noting that European security had relied on transatlantic partnership since 1949, that this partnership had been mutually beneficial, and that Europe valued its relationship with the United States. The first 3 pages contained language that could have appeared in any number of routine statements. Page 4 marked the turn. However, recent developments have demonstrated that reliance on consultation mechanisms that can be unilaterally bypassed creates strategic vulnerability that European citizens can no longer accept. The phrasing was diplomatic, but the message was clear. You bypassed us, so we're reducing our dependence on you. Pages 5 through 23 outline specific capabilities that the EU would develop independently of American systems. The list was comprehensive and expensive. Satellite reconnaissance independent of U.S. systems. Command and control infrastructure not dependent on American technology. Logistics capabilities for force projection without American airlift or sea lift. Intelligence sharing agreements among European services that would not automatically include American access. Each capability was described with technical specificity that made clear this was not aspirational rhetoric, but an actual implementation plan. Budget allocations were specified. Procurement timelines were detailed. Industrial partnerships were named. The level of detail signaled that planning had been underway for months or years, waiting for the political moment to justify public announcement. Pages 24 through 37 addressed economic dimensions. The document proposed a European defense industrial base substantially independent of American contractors. It outlined regulatory frameworks to facilitate European companies developing and producing advanced systems currently sourced from American manufacturers. It proposed financing mechanisms to support European startups in critical technology areas. The economic implications extended beyond defense. Creating parallel European capabilities would require massive investment, but also create European jobs, European intellectual property, and European industrial capacity. Over time, this would shift economic leverage from Washington to Brussels in defense-related sectors worth hundreds of billions of dollars annually. Pages 38 through 52 outline diplomatic and institutional changes. The EU proposed enhanced coordination mechanisms that would allow rapid collective response to security developments without requiring individual member state unanimous consent. The proposed changes would strengthen EU institutions relative to both member states and external partners like the United States. The institutional reforms were arguably more significant than the capability developments. European foreign policy had been hampered by requirements for unanimous agreement among 27 member states, allowing single countries to veto collective action. The proposed changes would introduce qualified majority voting in certain security areas, dramatically increasing European capacity for rapid, coordinated response. Pages 53 through 58 address the transatlantic relationship directly. The language remained diplomatic but firm. The EU expressed continued commitment to partnership with the United States, but specified that partnership must be based on consultation, mutual respect, and recognition of European institutional prerogatives. The document listed specific incidents over the previous decade where these principles had been violated, providing a catalog of American unilateralism. The historical recitation served a strategic purpose. It demonstrated that European frustration was not a temporary reaction to a single incident, but a culmination of accumulated grievances. This framing made clear that European response was not intended to punish one specific action, but to fundamentally restructure the relationship to prevent future unilateralism. Pages 59 through 61 contain the conclusion and implementation timeline. The document specified that implementation would begin immediately, with initial capability deliveries expected within 18 months and full operational capacity within 7 years. The timeline was aggressive but achievable, signaling serious commitment rather than empty promises. The final paragraph was brief but devastating. The European Union seeks partnership with all nations based on mutual respect and consultation. Where such partnership is offered, it will be embraced. Where it is not offered, Europe will proceed independently. Nokia, the message was unmistakable. We prefer partnership, but we no longer require it. The American reaction was immediate and flustered. The State Department issued a response within 17 minutes that praised transatlantic partnership while expressing concern about duplicative capabilities that might undermine NATO effectiveness. The speed of response indicated preparation, but the content revealed that Washington had not anticipated the scope or sophistication of the European document. The concern about duplicative capabilities inadvertently confirmed European fears. The phrase implied that European capabilities should complement American systems rather than providing genuine independence. This was precisely the model of subordinate partnership that the EU document rejected. Within 45 minutes, NATO headquarters convened an emergency session. The Secretary General issued a carefully worded statement emphasizing the alliance's continued strength while acknowledging frank discussions about capability development. The diplomatic language barely concealed panic about an institution whose primary purpose was transatlantic defense cooperation, facing a major European pivot toward independence. Financial markets took several hours to fully price in the implications. Initial reactions focused on defense stocks, with European companies surging and American contractors falling. But broader implications emerged as analysts digested the document's scope. European technology companies gained on expectations of increased investment. American tech giants, with major European government contracts, faced questions about future access. Currency markets saw the euro strengthen 4% against the dollar in heavy trading. The move reflected multiple factors: expectations of increased European defense spending, boosting economic growth, reduced European dependence on dollar-denominated transactions for defense procurement, and general perception of European strength relative to American influence. Bond markets revealed diverging sovereign credit assessments. Yields on German, French, and Dutch government bonds fell slightly as investors anticipated increased European institutional capacity and economic integration. Yields on U.S. Treasuries rose modestly as markets priced in reduced European financing of American deficit spending if European resources shifted toward domestic defense investment. The document's release timing ensured maximum media coverage in Europe, while catching American media during morning news cycles less prepared for in-depth analysis. European newspapers had clearly been briefed in advance, publishing detailed analysis within 2 hours that demonstrated prior access to the document. American media played catch-up, initially treating it as a diplomatic spat before gradually recognizing its significance. Warren Buffett's response addressed the fundamental shift in alliance dynamics that the document represented. In 75 years of the Atlantic Alliance, Buffett observed, the basic structure had been consistent. America provided security, Europe provided bases and political support, and everyone benefited from stability that enabled economic growth. And I have learned that arrangements based on asymmetric dependence eventually become unstable. The dependent party either accepts subordination permanently, which creates resentment, or eventually seeks independence, which creates conflict. The European document is Europe choosing independence over subordination. He applied it to why the American unilateral decision triggered such a comprehensive European response. The specific policy wasn't the issue, Buffett explained. Europe had accepted American unilateralism for decades on various issues. But accepting unilateralism when you have no alternative is different from accepting it when you're capable of independence but choose partnership. Europe has now demonstrated it can coordinate rapidly, plan comprehensively, and implement systematically. The 8 days of silence proved that 27 countries with different interests and languages can maintain message discipline better than Washington can maintain secrecy. That capability is itself a strategic asset that changes the negotiation dynamics. Buffett's analysis revealed why Washington's response had been so ineffective. American officials kept emphasizing partnership and alliance strength, but those appeals only work when the other party needs you more than you need them. Once Europe demonstrates credible independence, appeals to alliance solidarity become requests for European charity rather than assertions of American indispensability. His closing was characteristically insightful. Strategic partnerships survive only when both parties believe they're better off together than apart. For 75 years, Europe believed it needed America for security more than America needed Europe for anything. The 61-page document announced that calculation has changed. And once both parties can walk away, the relationship becomes truly voluntary, which means it becomes truly negotiable, which means the subordinate partner becomes an actual partner. So here is where we stand. The European Union broke 8 days of carefully orchestrated silence with a 61-page framework document outlining comprehensive strategic autonomy that fundamentally restructures 75 years of transatlantic security architecture. Brussels demonstrated coordination, planning sophistication, and political will that shocked Washington and forced immediate defensive responses. Warren Buffett explained why this represents the transformation of European-American relations from asymmetric dependence to symmetric partnership. Can the transatlantic alliance survive this shift? Certainly if American policymakers accept genuine partnership rather than continued subordination. Can European countries actually implement the ambitious timeline? History suggests skepticism, but the detail of planning suggests seriousness. And the question that extends beyond alliance politics into the structure of global power. Can American strategic dominance persist when its most important allies choose independence over dependence? The 8 days of silence were more powerful than any immediate response could have been. Silence demonstrated discipline, planning, and most importantly, that Europe was not reacting, but choosing. The 61-page document that followed provided the roadmap for that choice. And Washington woke up to discover that allies who can choose are fundamentally different from allies who have no choice. Please hit the bell icon and subscribe my channel for daily updates.